Hi, I'm Deborah, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about the winding spiritual path and how I found mine, and how it's not usually linear. I guess some people come into this world knowing exactly what they believe and want and their purposes, and they just stay on this linear course, but I don't know too many people like that, and it certainly hasn't been that way for me. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that. So I was brought up in a very spiritual home. It was both spiritual and religious. And by that, I mean that I experienced all the dogma of religion. I was raised Pentecostal Christian. My dad was actually the minister, the pastor of a church, very old school Jamaican church. And, with speaking in tongues, hands-on healing, rolling on the floor, people passing out from just the energy of the Holy Ghost. So I was raised in what I call now Christian mysticism. And you'll understand as I talk about why I consider myself a mystic now, but not a Christian one. But so I was brought up with a very deep belief in God, spirituality, that there are, spirits and angels that you can talk to God, and, less of a focus on the angels because it was always about direct connection to Jesus, and to God and the Holy Spirit, the Trinity. And so that was definitely my background. Um, but it never truly aligned with me. I was always, from the time I was a very young child, like 5, I was asking lots of questions, because I was smart, and I was like, "Some of this stuff doesn't add up." And I would ask questions, and I was always told it was like a sin to ask questions, and that questioning was expressing doubt in God and the teachings, and so I was told not to ask questions. So I eventually stopped asking them out loud, but continued to ask them inside, and I just felt like, I don't know if this religion thing is for me because I can't ask questions. I'm supposed to pretend that it all makes sense when it doesn't, when there's things that just don't align with me, and I can't have my questions answered, and I'm not even supposed to ask them. And so, I was a child in my parents' home, so we went to church a lot because my dad was the pastor. So I was in the choir, we did all the youth group, Wednesday night prayer meetings. So it was usually church about 5 times a week. So I was brought up pretty religious. And I will say that my parents, I mean, if you know Pentecostals, my parents were the real deal. Um, they're very devout. And while the religion and its rules and guidelines didn't align with me, didn't fully resonate with me, it was a wonderful upbringing to learn fantastic values. One of the things I learned from my family, my parents, is integrity. My dad had immense integrity. I learned so much from him. He was such a great model of integrity. He lived the life. He lived what he preached inside and out, day and night, 24/7. I remember when as a teenager, he wouldn't even lie to the telemarketers to tell them I'm not there. Like, I would have there would be telemarketers calling the house, or even bill collectors when I got a little older, and I would be like, "Dad, tell them I'm not here." And he couldn't do it, but he did learn to, like, sidestep it and say she's not available or she can't come to the phone. But he couldn't lie. He was just really an amazing human being in that way. I learned so much from him. But the religion just didn't really resonate for me. And I actually really, at one point when I had my son when I was a teenager, and I had a lot of guilt around that. My family certainly, my parents definitely helped with that. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try to be a devout Christian. So I got this like book on reading the Bible in 365 days, even though I'd read it plenty before, but I wasn't really paying attention. I mean, you couldn't help but absorb it, but I was like, I'm going to really apply myself. I'm going to see if I can make this stuff like stick. And I did it, and I started going to church. And my mom, who, I mean, my parents were always telling me that I was going to go to hell because I wasn't born again. I didn't get baptized. In Pentecostal faith, you don't get baptized as a child. You get baptized when you're older and conscious enough to make the choice for yourself. And so, even though they told me I was going to hell all the time, um, and I had suddenly decided to dedicate myself to the Bible and Christianity, I was like, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to make it work. And because I had so much guilt about being a single mom out of wedlock. And my mom, this was like a few months into me, like going to church, reading the Bible every day. She was like, basically, I can't even remember the exact words she used, but she was basically like, I'm not buying it. I don't believe you. And I was like, what? I was like, I'm over here like trying my best. I'm like really working at it. And she was like, she could tell that it was like I was trying. I was making myself. And at that point I was like, okay, if she can see through this, who am I kidding? I mean, excuse me. Who am I kidding? So I was like, okay, I'm not fooling anybody. And it's not sticking. I've been trying, but it's not sticking. So I'm just going to give up on this. Um, but prior to that, well, actually, it was maybe around the same time. We a lot of religions practice the proselytizing. You go door to door, and your job is to recruit people so that you can bring more souls into heaven. And so we did it when I was growing up. We had to go door to door on Saturdays. Um, and we got our fair share of Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and whoever else would come to our neighborhood. And I remember my dad loved when the Jehovah's Witnesses came because he loved to like get into it with them, but like in a loving way. He didn't argue with them, but he was just like, let me preach to them. He loved it. But anyway, we had these Jehovah's Witnesses that came, and one of the things you do when you go to door is you leave propaganda for your religion, which are called tracts. And so we used to give out tracts all the time, and we had some really good ones to scare the bejesus out of you. But these Jehovah's Witnesses came when my parents were at home, and they brought a tract about the evils of Buddhism. I'm not sure why they gave that one to us. My dad is Chinese, but spoke like straight up patois, and my mom is black, so I'm not sure. But anyway, I read that tract on the evils of Buddhism, and I was like, this sounds great. I was very intrigued. And in high school, I had the great experience of having an English teacher who introduced us to meditation. It was non-religious. It was just like take a few minutes at the end of not every class, but occasionally, and she would just give us time and space to meditate. So when I read the tract on the evils of Buddhism, I was like, this makes a lot of sense. Like, I don't know about the Buddha being God, but there's a bunch of other stuff in here that makes sense to me. And so at that point, I embarked on a study of Buddhism. I really studied Zen, and the first book I read was Zen Keys. And then I went on to read many books by Thich Nhat Hanh and just study meditation. And it was my saving grace, thank God. I'm so grateful to Buddhism and what I learned about meditation and practice, because as a young single mom, and someone who had experienced all kinds of trauma, abuse, things like that. I had depression, anxiety, wild emotional swings, just the inability to manage and control my own mind and my own desires and will. And, I was very much a mess as far as I was concerned. And so meditation was a way for me to access peace. And I learned meditation, mindfulness, meditation through Buddhism, and then also like visualizations, things like that. There's so many forms of meditation, and I really clung to Buddhism for a long time, for many years. I went through a period of just a few years where I was extremely devout. I was vegan, but that level of Buddhism didn't really work for me. I definitely have a thing about rules and following someone else's rules. I don't really care for it. Um, that's why I've kind of stayed away from religions, but I needed to explore it. And it was what Buddhism gave me was this really amazing perspective on the value of compassion and equanimity. I really needed peace in my life, and I didn't know how to get it. But Buddhism and the methods of meditation and the philosophy behind it, because was also a philosophy minor in college. I loved the philosophy of Buddhism. It made so much sense to me. It gave me a way to access peace and to recognize that there was a center that I could come back to, and that no matter what was going on in the world around me, I could access that peace. And that's the equanimity, the steadiness, that state of balance that we work towards, that we want to achieve. So I loved that. And I had a really easy time with this concept of compassion in Buddhism. And I just have always been a very compassionate person. I've always really cared about others. I guess so much of it coming from my own suffering and trauma that I really related to and wanted to be a comfort to others. So Buddhism really um, resonated with me. I even went through a period where I connected to a sangha and was going to group meditations, but again, because of the rules, I wasn't so much into that. And then I found my way to Vipassana, um, and went to one of the 10-day silent retreats, and it was amazing. It was truly life-changing to discover that you can access this energy, this for me, it was ecstatic states without taking anything, you know? And at that point, I hadn't had any experience with plant medicine or anything. So it was truly amazing. And but what I didn't like was that I was having basically like full body ecstatic states and visions. But in these Vipassana meditations and retreats, like you are not supposed to, no matter what you're experiencing, whether it's sorrow or bliss, you are supposed to maintain equanimity. That is the goal. Like, so because you're not supposed to get attached to one emotion or the other. And therefore, for me, it meant I had to suppress what I was feeling. And I was feeling ecstatic joy. And I did suppress it. I enjoyed it as much as I could without letting on how ecstatic I was. But when I finished the retreat, I was like, that was a great experience, but I can't like sign up for that, because how is it that I can experience such bliss and joy, but I'm supposed to act like it's not a big deal and not like fully throw myself into it and immerse myself into it? So I was like, I do love the philosophy of Buddhism, but I can't, I don't want to practice to the level where I can't, like, I don't know, just indulge in joy and pleasure. So, but I continued to practice meditation and, you know, adhere to many of the tenets. I even did a pilgrimage to India and traveled to Sarnath, which is the part of India. It's one of the four pilgrimage spots for Buddhists. It's the place where the Buddha first taught the Dharma. And I stayed at a Tibetan monastery, and that was a beautiful experience. I really loved the Tibetans, and only since later got into Tibetan Buddhism because it's just so different in many ways. And so I've had, and along the way I was exploring self-hypnosis, out-of-body experiences, just, anything that I felt I could access, because I knew there was more. And I've known that since I was a child. I think I had my first lucid dream around 7 or 8 years old on accident. And so I've always known that there was more, but I was looking for the right perspective, the right pathway to access it and to make sense of it. And nothing that I explored was quite all there for me, but I learned a lot from all of everything that I studied. And so then after that, I experienced a lot of some tragedies in my life, where at this point, most of my immediate family is deceased, and they all died in a pretty short period of time. And I, when on the last day of the Vipassana retreat, I met a woman who I'm still Facebook friends with, who told me about um, how she had uh, lived in Central America and had been working with native indigenous people drinking ayahuasca. And I had heard of ayahuasca, but I didn't know that much about it. This was probably like 15 years ago. And I was like, that sounds really interesting. I would love to do that one day. But life happens. And I continued my spiritual practices, but ayahuasca itself was not on the top of my radar, or top of my list. And then my mother died. Then my brother died after I took care of him for nearly 2 years. And his death was really a tough on me in so many ways. I grew from it, but as he was on his journey, he talked about all the things he wanted to do when he got better. And we talked a lot about plant medicine. And he said, we watched a lot of Graham Hancock videos about the shared visions that people would have while drinking ayahuasca. And he said, he would tell me, I really want to drink ayahuasca. I was like, I would love to. And he's like, when I get better, I'm going to go to the jungle and I'm going to drink it. And so we would talk about this. And it really put it in my head that I really wanted to go and to the jungle and drink ayahuasca. And so after he died, my father died just a couple months later, completely unrelated, of course. And so at that point, I was like, okay, there's nothing stopping me. Now is the time, because the life I'm living is not making me happy. So at that point, I sold everything. I had a home, I had a life, I had a career, sold everything and quit my life and went to the jungle to drink ayahuasca and study other plant medicines. And that's, before I left, I had already decided I was a mystic, because from what I had studied and learned, a mystic doesn't have any particular dogma, but rather mysticism is based in the idea that you connect to the divine. Your sense of the spiritual world is based on direct experience. And that was the only thing that I could really relate to. Like, I knew the experiences I've had in meditation and just in life. And I was like, I'm a mystic. That's what I am. And it would throw people off when I would tell them that, because they don't even know, like, what category is that? you're not like, at least Buddhism gave somebody something to grasp onto. I remember I had to fill out lots of paperwork for my brother when he was sick, and one of the questions on every form is like, "What religion are you?" Because they want to know that if you are approaching your time to transition, what type of clergy they should bring in. And I told my brother, I was like, "I'm going to put Buddhist because it's the closest thing." But by that time, I was already, and because for me, I felt like having a Buddhist monk or priest would be, not really priest, but anyway, would be comforting to me. Um, so yeah, I went and I studied plant medicine, and since doing that, I am on a all new path. I think the plant medicine is not the be all end all, but it opens new doors for you to really understand and interpret reality. And for me, what it's done is open my mind to accessing different kinds of paths and modalities to continue my healing and my spiritual growth. And I look forward to sharing more about all of that as time goes on and how it's helped shape me. But, this, I just wanted to share a little bit about my path, because to share the approach that I'm coming from, the perspective that I'm coming from, which is one of that of a mystic, where I don't really subscribe to any particular dogma or religion, but I base what I believe and know on my experience, the reality that I experience, and that's how I got here. And I feel like it's a unique perspective, and yet it's not, because I know there are many other people who are arriving or have arrived at that place. And so I just wanted to share that today, to just share a little bit about me and help you to understand where I'm coming from as I continue to share information and content. And I hope that it gives you some food for thought and some opportunity for greater reflection, to think about your own spiritual path and where it has brought you and where you want to go with it. Because that's what this channel is about. It's about spiritual growth, because spiritual growth is the foundation of a happy, fulfilled, joyous, purposeful life. Without it, without spirituality, my life would be empty. So that's all I want to share for today. And I just pray that it's a blessing to you, and that it gives you something to think about, um, and contemplate. And just wishing you love, joy, and peace in everything you do. Thanks, and have a great day.